So maybe you're scrolling Instagram or TikTok and see a video that spells sex as S-E-G-G-S, or see someone use the word unalive. These are workarounds. It's what's called Algospeak, ways for people to get around online censorship. However, it is changing how we communicate. The group chat's here. Let's go. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Right, so I feel like you have seen this on your feeds. Like when I say Algospeak, I mean this trend where maybe you see people using words like corn instead of porn, or spelling sex in a different way, use the word unalive to replace the word suicide. This is fundamentally about trying to make sure that the algorithm doesn't ban or suppress your video, even if it's about something that these social media platforms consider controversial. But here's the thing. Algospeak has kind of created a new kind of internet language. Rebecca Jennings is here, Noelle Perdue is here, and we're here to talk about how this phenomenon is playing online and how maybe it might change our relationship to free speech. Noelle, Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, of course. Rebecca, I'm going to start with you. I feel like the most common example that I see on my feed is people using the watermelon emoji to represent Palestine in order to make sure that those videos don't get suppressed. What are some examples that you're seeing on your feed?
Yeah, I would say a lot of them are kind of replacing a word that either rhymes or kind of has the same meaning, but not the same like weight to it. So you'll see unalive instead of kill, or grape instead of rape. And I think like some of these, I think, are a little bit just like infantilizing. It makes a heavy thing feel less so, in addition to getting around these algorithms.
Mm-hmm. The idea of making a heavy thing feel less so. Sometimes that changes our relationship to how we talk about that heavy thing itself. Noelle, who is most affected by this kind of content moderation, would you say?
Say I'm really worried about how it affects younger people who are spending so much of their kind of communication online and really grow up in these environments, grow up communicating in these environments. And I think for some young people online, it represents the bulk of their communication just generally. And I think growing up in these environments that are so heavily censored and monitored and really kind of train you to speak a certain way and avoid certain things really does affect how people interact with each other offline as well.
Yeah, because you're constantly sort of talking about being like, how do I make sure I'm heard? How do I make sure I get around all of these filters? To that end, Rebecca, in January, there was an example of Algospeak that I really want to talk about. But to do that, I got to play you this.
Can you guys please stop gatekeeping this cute winter boot? Because I have been looking for it everywhere. And I asked you guys for suggestions in the last video. You did so well on giving me suggestions. I found out so much about winter boots that I never would have known.
So what you're hearing there is a video of someone talking about cute winter boots. It sounds like a pretty mundane TikTok video, just kind of saying, hey, I found these boots. I'm really excited about them. But while she's talking, what she's holding up is a sign that's speaking out against Donald Trump's deportation policies. Thousands of people have been using this particular concept of this approach, like this concept of cute winter boots, to talk about this political moment. Rebecca, I think that's an interesting strategy, right? Like, I'm curious what you make of these videos and what happens when people are forced to talk about a thing that, the algorithm will sonically pick up and say, oh, they're just talking about boots. Sure, we can sort of, promote this. But visually, they're trying to get across a very political message. What do you think happens when, we see more and more of these pile up?
Yeah, what I will say is that this is an immensely creative way to talk about politics on a platform that has long been very unfriendly to politics. TikTok never wanted to be a place for news or anything hard or controversial. But obviously, it's a place where we spend so much time. It's going to be a place where people talk about that stuff. And I think it's a really interesting way that people are getting around some of these perceived boxes that they feel like they have to hit. But I'll also say that, like, this is kind of a form of self-censorship that I think a lot of people that have grown up in algorithmic social media are just like, we're training ourselves to use. And it's just like, it's such a sad reminder that, we know that things that are even remotely controversial or tricky are going to get deprioritized on these apps because, they aren't as marketable. They can't put ads next to something that's super heavy newsy or super related to sex. And so what the tech owners want to do is like just discourage people from talking about them at all. and be a place where it's just like just dancing, whatever. And so I think the fact that people have had to find ways around this is just a very telling example of like, you know, we're just so used to living in this kind of like authoritarian space because these platforms are authoritarian spaces. Like Mark Zuckerberg gets to decide what stays on Facebook and what doesn't, and what travels on Facebook and Instagram and what doesn't. And so it's just, it feels very it's a reminder of how these tech oligarchs have been able to kind of set the laws of the land in these platforms, and now they're doing so in real life in our government.
I like that. Yeah, your answer there is sort of traversing the space between futility and resistance at the same time. Like there's this idea of like, well, these are the platforms we have to communicate with each other. We don't have other ones. However, they are under control of these people. So like these are the small sort of resistances that you can maybe carve out. I'm going to come back to that point in just a moment. Noelle, you're a porn historian who posts educational videos on social media. How does having to use alternate language like the corn emoji or like the word corn, how does that affect the conversation that you're trying to have about sex work, about the history of sex work, about the ways that people actually talk about sex work?
Yeah, I mean, it's very frustrating. Like Rebecca said, it's deeply infantilizing. I have a background in porn script writing and production, and I left to talk about pornography and the history of pornography in mainstream media because I think there's such a tremendous gap in people's understanding of porn and people's ability to kind of talk about it and talk about how it affects their lives and affects, you know, politics and technology, et cetera, et cetera. And then to sort of go into these spaces to try to have those conversations and be immediately met with so much just profound censorship and really an antagonistic relationship with these platforms. It can be really frustrating. I also think it's very frustrating, this sort of play pretend that we're doing of existing within Instagram as if it's or you know, X.com, Twitter, et cetera, all these platforms as if they are places for children to be, in my opinion, even if, you know, there's no content about pornography, about sex, about all these different things. I don't think Instagram is an appropriate platform for children. I think it is a platform for adults. When I'm on Instagram, I'm talking to adults about my work, about pornography, et cetera. I should be able to assume that children are not on Instagram because it's not a healthy platform for kids. Like go play outside, you know. And it is just something that is very frustrating, and I think that it further reinforces all this stigma that we have about pornography. That is what I'm actively trying to speak on and actively trying to kind of bring these conversations into the light and start having them in a more casual way, in a more kind of shame-free way, and having to use all these words that reinforce all this stigma that this isn't something that we should be talking about, I think really actively works against what I'm trying to do.
I mean, I think the point that you brought up about the idea of whether these spaces are for children or not for children is really like, it's like about, are they brand safe or are they not brand safe? Are they, you know, can advertisers, you know, take out an ad and put it in the space or not? Or do they have to sort of like figure out, go like, oh, no, we can't put, you know, an ad here because this space is reserved only for adults. So it doesn't feel like the mall. And maybe not every space has to feel like the mall. Like maybe not every space online has to sort of feel, A, commercialized, and B, as a public space. You should be able to, as an adult, talk about things that you want to talk about as an adult. But however, we are dealing with algorithms, Rebecca, that are quite often governing the boundaries of those conversations. And those algorithms are a black box. You don't always know, you know, if your work is going to be suppressed or if it's going to be promoted or if it's going to be, you know, prevented from reaching any of your followers. And we're talking about people who have followers, will put out a video talking about something that the platforms deem a bit controversial. And like those people literally signed up to see your content, but they won't be able to see your content because of those sort of policies. How does that affect the way that people engage online, you think, Rebecca?
Yeah, totally. I think it makes people like Noelle like scared to say anything because they know that with one post or with one like infraction against the terms of service, they could be losing their entire account. They could be losing money. They could be losing like years of work and like community. So what ends up happening is like your feed is just full of like beige medium slop that doesn't mean anything. It's like very brand safe, but it's not interesting. It's not educational. It's just the lowest common denominator stuff. And so, you know, I think it's also interesting that like for the first like 10 years of social media, you had all these like right wingers complain that the problem was that their views were getting silenced by woke tech companies. And now, obviously, as we see, it's so much more likely to be the opposite. Instead, you're being silenced for being trans, or you're silenced for being, you don't fit into the model of what these tech companies want their typical user to be. And so instead, like, these platforms are also like built around creating rage bait. And so instead of, prioritizing videos or content that are like complex and nuanced and interesting and for adults, they reward the ones that are just very basic and attention getting, even if they're very cruel and just rage bait, I guess.
Yeah. And Noelle, you sort of talked about this in terms of your relationship, the relationship of this stuff to your work, but maybe you can talk about it a bit more broadly in terms of how it affects other people who are trying to make a livelihood on the internet, because certainly that is a part of why you would exist online. And then if you can't talk about your work, you can't really make a living.
Yeah, and it's so frustrating, I think, for a lot of minority communities, especially that are hit harder with moderation and censorship. It really is this culture of fear, and it really affects, I think, how people are engaging with their work and engaging with online communities. And for myself, sex workers and people who work in the adult industry, it can be a really isolating kind of industry to be in, and so many of our connections are made online, and community exists online. And particularly the idea that you could lose that so quickly is really frightening. And also, I think that people talk about online space a little bit flippantly, or social media a little bit flippantly, but at this point, social media presence has become so ubiquitous and so kind of, it's the business card. If you want to legitimize yourself, you send the handle. Like when I was pitching my book to literary agents, there were a lot of literary agents that didn't ask for a book pitch at all. They just asked for a social media handle, which is crazy. Or, the Squarespace slogan of "a website makes it real." That's true. The online world and the digital space has really become IRL in so many more ways than IRL has been able to keep up with, in a way that this is real. Like, we are talking about real stakes here. We are talking about real careers and relationships and lives.
Rebecca, it's not lost on me that this moment of censorship is kind of a bit more explicit in maybe every arena. I think it used to be pretty explicit and online. Now it's in real life, right? So like New York Times put out this article last week saying, like, these are the words that federal agencies are literally being asked to limit or avoid. And these are words including pollution, activism, and women. How do you connect the online censorship with the real life censorship? And which is not to say that online life is not real life. It's just to say that, like, there's a different level of dimension. It's now maybe government policy to include some of that censorship.
Yeah, it's so scary. I mean, like Noelle just said, like, social media is real life, but at the same time, this is another level of it just like directly affecting like human beings who have no interest in being on the internet, because I think the internet under these major platforms have trained people to just like work within the system and understand that they can't talk about sex without saying some infantilizing word like seggs or like corn, which I think is like so insulting. And like, but that trains people to then, understand that, like, well, of course they want to do that in government as well. And I think, like, when, your entire identity is marked as like sensitive by a social media site, why wouldn't it be marked sensitive by the government, which is now like kind of being run by these people? And it's just it feels very authoritarian in a way that, Algospeak already felt icky to a lot of people, I think, even when it was just kind of like centered on platforms. And now that it's, I watched a clip yesterday about how like the Department of Defense had to remove a bunch of photos of the Enola Gay, which is
the bomber,
the very famous plane that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. They removed it because it said gay in it. Yeah. Which is just like, beyond parody. But these examples are just, it's affecting so much more than just like the ability of one video to go viral. It's so much more important than that.
I think I'm both heartened and worried. Like I sort of hear the ways that people try to figure out their way through these structures of censorship, because like that's what humans literally have always done. But on the other hand, it is quite striking to sort of hear the ways that that we are being more and more censored as time goes on. So I appreciate both of you for bringing your insights today. This has been maybe delight is not the word, but it's been very insightful. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Yes, of course. Talk to you soon. Okay, thank you. Noelle Perdue is a writer and porn historian. You can find her work on her Substack, Porn World. Rebecca Jennings is a features writer for New York Magazine. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. As you might recall, last year, Inside Out 2 absolutely dominated the box office. $1.7 billion in revenue, which made it the highest grossing animated film of all time. That was last year, and that record did not hold for long, thanks to this film.
Ne Zha, 好久不见啊！你愿与老夫一同出征否？
战架，我最擅长。
That is a bit of the Chinese film Ne Zha. Ne Zha 2 just came out. In less than 3 weeks, it became the highest grossing animated film ever. It hasn't even opened in Europe yet. It's about to do that. So Ne Zha 2 worldwide revenue has now surpassed $2 billion. Rachel Ho is here to talk about this movie. Rachel, hello, friend. Nice to see you.
Hello, hello.
First of all, you're not even in the country. You're not even like somewhere cold with me. You are in Singapore right now. Tell me, do you sense Ne Zha fever around you? Is that what's happening? I know we just opened there, so.
It just opened on the 6th. I went to go watch it. They have all these really fun cutouts all over the theater. Like you can take your picture with them. Multiple theaters are carrying it as well. Multiple theaters within one cinema are all carrying it. So I'd say it's hitting the fever pitch here. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, tell me about for people who are not familiar with Ne Zha as a franchise, just explain a little bit of what we're dealing with here.
All right, it's a bit of a tricky one, I think, to discuss with like getting into too far into the weeds. But basically, it's based off. You've got Chinese mythology, Chinese mythological characters. It's a 16th century novel called Investiture of the Gods. Real light stuff, real good. The franchise itself is following two boys. It's Ne Zha and Ao Bing, and the two of them are made from something called the Chaos Pearl. They're reincarnations of it. There's a positive one, the Spirit Pearl. You got the negative one, the Demon Orb. The pearl is split in half.
Of course.
And of course, because that's just what happens when you have a Chaos Pearl. They get split in half.
Yeah.
And the good family, it was a soldier. He was supposed to get the Spirit Pearl and reincarnate his son to become, the Spirit Pearl. But it got stolen, as these things do.
As they do, of course.
It's a thing. It's a thing. And he ends up getting the Demon Orb instead. And that's
the wrong
no
orb,
good, right?
I don't think that's
It's
the orb
so
that you want.
wrong. No, it's not the one you want because it's demonic in its own way. But there's also other things going on. And then the Dragon King in the underworld, he got the Spirit Pearl. So it's your classic switcheroo. It's the classic switcheroo situation. Yeah. That all happened in the first movie. Now it's the second one. They're like adolescents. They're kind of kids. Yeah. They're buddies now at this point, and they're on a vengeance journey. I'm going to call it that. Without spoiling too much, they're on a vengeance journey.
So you're saying the plot is, fellas, ever get the wrong orb? That's the general premise here. I'd love to see it. Listen,
pretty much.
Talk to me about the distance between Ne Zha and Ne Zha 2, because the first one comes out in 2019. It's a big hit. It made $726 million. Rachel, that's a lot of money. But the second one has tripled that performance. How does that even happen?
It's many different factors. I don't think you can point to just one thing. Okay. I think obviously the first one did so well, and there was a lot of anticipation. Coming into 6 years later, like a new one comes out. The first day of the release, it was on the Chinese Lunar New Year, like the first day of the new year. And that is it's kind of Christmas Day release, but bigger. Like when you get Chinese New Year releases in Chinese countries, they get like weeks off. They get a couple weeks off. It's not just a day or two that they get off. So it's that, you know, people watched it, they loved it, wrote about it online, got their friends, got their family. Everyone's on vacation. So you're just going out and watching it multiple times at this point. And also, I want to say, like, it's a good movie. And I don't think that you can get these numbers without it being a good movie. And then with the fact that it is a good movie, you've got a lot of national pride associated with it. With a country that's already fairly prideful in themselves, I do think, like, you have Chinese tradition, you have Chinese history and culture, and all those things inside. And it's also very, like, it's purely Chinese made as well as a film. And I do think they should be proud of this one. And then kind of layer on top of all of that the fact that during COVID, the whole world was basically pointing a finger at China. And I feel like I said, for an already prideful country, they just dug their heels right in. And I mean, we can relate to that, I think. Like, look at how much Canadians have really stepped up in our pride since, you know, these lovely trade wars that are going on right now. So, but at the end of the day, look, I'll say it's a good movie. You don't make that much money without it being a good movie, and it just spreads like wildfire like that.
I'm sensitive to that idea. The idea that exactly in a moment when you as a culture need an artifact to sort of rally around, you know, a movie or a song or an artist comes out and you say, that's it. That's the rocket. We are sort of going to sort of pay attention to this and sort of put a lot of energy around it. I will say it's also well known that the Chinese government does take a pretty hands-on role in the country's just general cultural production. That includes making sure that movies that are hits, you know, reflect the government's values. Does that knowledge change your experience of watching a movie like Ne Zha at all? Like, how does that sit in the back of your mind as you're watching this movie?
I mean, not even if it's a hit, like any Chinese film, it has to pass censorship. Like, it has
Rachel's
to
like,
be
even the
approved.
bad ones, you know? Yeah.
Even the really bad ones, like Joker 2, that has to get approved to go in, that kind of thing. I don't even think that got released in China. But anyways, the point is, the CCP is always looking for everything that is released around the country, whether it's the arts or, you know, sport, all those things. It has to promote the values of the CCP. It has to embrace the values of the party. And you're kind of looking, how can you, and so when I'm watching Chinese films, I'm always on the lookout for that. I'm like, what is it in this film that they're hoping will instill to their population? Like, what is it that and it can make for a fun little game. If you're like me and you like games like that, it can also create a bit of an allergy. Like, I have to admit, like, sometimes I avoid Chinese films sometimes because I'm like, I mean, it'd be nice if I could just see Chinese filmmakers make films without having to do it according to what their government is telling them to do. But that's just me.
Yeah,
that's just me.
Some people like to relax by, I don't know, playing board games. You like to play Spot the Propaganda. You know, like, where is it?
It's my version of Where's Waldo. It's my version of that. Yeah.
Okay. I got like a couple of minutes left here. Ultimately, is this the kind of movie that the average North American moviegoer can just dip into? They'd have no knowledge of maybe the first one and go like, yeah, I'm on board. Take me where you want to take me to judge you.
I think so. I mean, I think it's beautiful. Like, it honestly is such a well-made movie. The animation is gorgeous. The story is really lovely as well. And, you know, even though I'm saying there's propaganda elements, like, they are promoting family. They're promoting working together, two opposite people coming together and putting aside their differences.
Yeah.
And that's great. Who doesn't love that, right? So I do think that it's North American audiences can kind of get over that, what did Bong Joon-ho call it, you know, that 1-inch barrier at the bottom of the screen.
Talked about that yesterday.
I think you can.
Yeah.
Because it's beautiful. It's a gorgeous film. It's easy to get into. Probably for children might be a little bit more difficult because I don't believe there's an English dub available yet, which is a shame because this film, kind of going back to what we were talking about before, one of the reasons it's done so well is it has hit every demographic that it can possibly hit, and that includes children. And it's a harder sell, I think, to ask kids to sit for 2.5 hours and also read. Come on.
I mean, I was gonna say, like, I think the length is probably the bigger preventative factor here. Like, as much as all the other movies have gotten longer and longer, it feels like animation is stuck to being like, we shall only entertain children for 90 minutes. If you're doing 98 minutes, that's too long. Got to keep it to 90 minutes. And so the idea of a movie, I mean, look, even seeing this movie be this big of a hit at 2.5 hours long, those are striking numbers. You know, those are Scorsese numbers. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if anybody can just kind of sit down. Any kid can sit down for that long. But you know what? I'll do it, Rachel. I'll do it because you told me to. So thank you.
I mean, Chinese kids, they're built different, man. They're not built like you and I. Like kids in mainland China, they're built in a very different way. They're gonna sit, they're gonna enjoy it. It's gonna be great.
My child will not do that. Rachel Ho, you're the best, man. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Elamin.
Yes, of course. Rachel Ho is a film editor for Exclaim. Right now, she's in Singapore. Ne Zha 2 is currently playing in theaters across this country. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. The show will be back tomorrow, but I won't be in tomorrow. However, I will see you Monday. Talk to you soon.